Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
Florida is back on the table again for controversial legislation being pushed. This past Wednesday, Florida Republicans passed a bill that would satisfy Governor Ron DeSantis' proposal to create an elections police force. The bill gives $2.5 million to create the Office of Election Crimes and Security and would make ballot harvesting or having more than two ballots a felony, punishable with a fine up to $50,000 and 5 years in prison. Florida Republicans such as Representative Daniel Perez claimed that, quote, the whole point of this bill is to deter people from committing fraud. We're trying to stop bad actors, end quote. However, many have pushed back on that notion. Joe Scott, election supervisor in Broward County, commented on the bill stating, quote, these are people who will be looking for crimes where they are none. That has the potential to intimidate a lot of voters and the organizations who try to help voters, end quote. The political director of the voting rights advocacy group Equal Ground, Genesis Robinson, said in a statement, quote, so now we're criminalizing certain acts around the elections process that most folks, particularly in the Black community, have long held as a way to assist those in need. To spend time in jail for simply trying to be a good neighbor, that's a problem, end quote. But I want to pass off the conversation to you. Do you think this bill is more problem maker than problem solver?
Um, this bill is 100% a problem maker. Um, it is just a very posh way of saying that we don't want Black or POC votes to feel like they're welcome here. I mean,
Hello?
echoing Joe Scott, we've already seen time and time again where police officers find crime where there is none. They assume that because of the melanin in your skin, you're up to no good. They assume that you have a weapon or you are more violent because that is what white supremacy teaches us about Black people and POC people. I mean, we don't have to go into detail about how corrupt the police force is because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of articles detailing the excessive force and unlawful killings committed by the police officers against marginalized communities. All that I hear when I read this bill is that Governor DeSantis has found yet another legal avenue to suppress Black voters. This only goes to show you just how the legal system in America is built to work against Black people and people of color. It is a legal form of intimidation to make it even harder to reach marginalized communities that are statistically more likely to need assistance in getting their votes to the polls. I mean, there are also, I don't know about this, I don't know if you think this too, Daquon, but there are also ableist undertones to this bill as well, because the people who are physically unable to go to the polls, they need those third-party services to be able to cast their vote. So this whole situation, I mean, with these new restrictions in place, the fear of police interference or retaliation may overpower the desire for these third parties to assist and create accessibility for all voters. I mean, even critics have said that this bill is intended as a way for DeSantis to appease the Republicans who believe that the 2020 election results were fraudulent and that it is unnecessary, noting that local prosecutors can actually handle those fraud cases. But Daquan, what about you? I mean, do you think that this bill is intentionally created to suppress Black voters?
Absolutely. Absolute. I am absolutely sure, as I am sure the sky is blue. Because, first of all, let's dispel this myth of voter fraud. Because when we look at the numbers, I have looked at over 20 empirical peer reviewed studies, and not a single one of them showed a statistical significance to voter fraud. In fact, they show that you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to encounter voter fraud. So when we see these bills, especially with Republicans as governors and holding the House and Senate in
Mm-hmm.
states, all of these bills are meant for voter suppression. They're meant to create extra barriers to the poll because
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what this is. We have to realize, when it comes to mail in ballots, the people who do that the most are generally people who vote Democrat. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't make this process any easy to understand what the process is like to mail in the ballot. There's all these, if you've ever done it, there's all of these different things that you
Yeah.
have to do and like say, and all of these little jargony things that you have to read. And it does not make voting accessible. And so when you have a $50,000 fine plus up to 5 years in prison for certain different offenses, and you lay law after law after law just to make voter intimidate them into not voting, it's like, well, like there's all of these things that I can get in trouble for. I don't really understand it, so I'm not going to vote. Or
Mm-hmm.
like in Georgia, where they literally made it illegal for people to hand out food and water to Black people who are waiting in line to vote because in Black communities, people are waiting up to 9 or more hours just to vote in person. And
Mm-hmm.
so we also have to consider, especially that impact that it has on the Black community. The Black community are more likely to be working class or low income, meaning they have jobs. If you are a student in school, you don't get election day off. At least I did not get election day
Mm-mm.
off. Um, and there's all of these different things, just like you said with ableism, like there's all of these different ableist notions and underpinnings of it as well, because let's be real, when election season comes, we still may very well be in a pandemic. And so people relied
Mm-hmm.
on mail in ballots. And I think that it is absolutely intentional when you consider the 2018 midterm elections, because the 2018 midterm elections had some of the highest voter turnout rates than any other midterm election. And specifically, one of the largest jumps came from voters 18 to 29,
Mm-hmm.
specifically Black voters 18 to 29. More specifically, looking at census data, we find that nearly 46% of Black people between the ages of 18 and 24 registered to vote, and 31% of them voted. That is a high margin for midterm elections. So, what this tells me right now is they saw what happened in 2018, and they're not trying to have that during the 2022 midterm elections because
Mm-hmm.
they want Republicans to gain back control of the House and Senate.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree. I mean, this is also yet another reason why it's integral for marginalized communities specifically to get out and vote.
Right.
We have to stop people like Ron DeSantis from taking any position of power because he is slowly but surely creating more and more legislation that is targeting communities that have fought so long to get the little rights that we do have. And for anyone who is a part of a marginalized community, don't think that Governor DeSantis isn't coming for you next. Like,
Right.
just because his legislation so far hasn't affected you yet doesn't mean that he won't come up with something else in the future. I mean, he's already targeted keeping the truth about racism out of schools to further misinform our children about the realities of the world that we live in. He's targeted the LGBTQIA community to try to erase us from the school system. And now he's targeting Black and POC communities to further suppress their voices, all in an effort to protect whiteness and Christianity. I mean, do you really think that your community won't be next? It really is time for us to wake up and realize that the greatest threat to our society isn't just white supremacy alone, but it's apathy and division. Too
Mm,
many too many of our marginalized communities are fighting amongst each other, playing a game of who has it worse, instead of realizing the fact that if we stand together, we could accomplish so much more than if we stand alone. Daquon, I just want to ask you, like, why do you think it's so difficult for marginalized communities to stand in the spotlight as a unified front?
I think that it's one of these situations where a lot of times there's so many different outside factors that cause
Mm-hmm.
infighting. you have to figure there's people are being attacked on many fronts, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's for your race, whether it's for your sexuality, whatever. And, you know, people, let's be real, only have so much attention. So it's like you're
Mm-hmm.
giving this much attention here and something else is being left in the dark. And so that creates kind of this infighting within marginalized communities. We saw
Mm-hmm.
this especially during, you know, like the Black Power movements of the 60s, where
Mm-hmm.
people were literally like, hey, you're Black first. So, like, we need to focus on that. You know, queer stuff and women's stuff can come later. I mean, eventually, we saw this coalition between the Black Power movement, the LGBTQ plus movements, the
Mm-hmm.
women's rights movements, and that created such a powerful coalition. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that now, as we're facing these issues, they saw what happened in the past when they got together. And so they're trying to stop that from happening again.
Mm. I also think too there is a problem with a lot of marginalized communities not understanding intersectionality. Um, Specifically in Black communities, we've noticed too, because that's the only community that I know about, you know, because I'm a part of it, you know, from firsthand, you know, but there is, you know, a lot of division amongst us because, you know, when we say Black Lives Matter, that includes trans lives, that includes gay lives, Black gay lives and Black trans lives. And I think that a lot of times people are like, especially I've noticed in the Black community, there has been a lot of people saying, oh, well, you know, I ain't with that gay shit or that LGBT shit, but the Black stuff, that's what's important. It's kind of like, well, no, because Black and gay, I'm not Black first or gay second, or the case may be. I am both at the same time. I am it's intersections. There is no way to divide those things from my personhood. So I think it's just really frustrating, especially in these communities of color, that, you know, we can't understand the fact that two things can exist at the same time, and that having that intersectionality helps us understand that we have to fight not just for Black cis straight lives. We can't just fight just for Black lives alone. We have to fight for Asian lives. We have to fight for Latina lives. We have to fight for indigenous lives. Like, and the fact that there is so much focus on just our community or just a specific community, and not like extending those olive branches, or at the very least understanding that, you know, just focusing on our issues alone doesn't stop the major issue as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think that this gets back at this notion of why it's so important to have conversations about race and
Mm-hmm.
racism, be not only national conversations, but conversations that are in schools, conversations that can be broken down so people realize this type of thing where it's like we are intersectional beings. We have different identities that exist at the same time. And throughout different communities, whether you are a part of the Black community, the Latinx community, Asian community, or Indigenous community, there are struggles that have overlaps. There are struggles that have
Exactly.
similarities, and learning from those similarities, recognizing both the differences and similarities, and being able to gain better empathy for other people and the struggles that they go to.
Exactly. The New York Times recently came under heat after tennis superstar Serena Williams called them out for erroneously using a photo of her sister Venus. The printed article, which covered Williams's new venture fund, Serena Ventures, highlighted a picture of Venus Williams, while the text noted it was Serena Williams. To Serena. Williams took to Twitter to respond, tweeting, no matter how far we've come, we get reminded that it's not enough. This is why I raised 11 million for Serena Ventures, to support the founders who are overlooked by ingrained systems, woefully unaware of their biases. Because even I am overlooked. You can do better at New York Times. The New York Times responded to the tweet saying, this was our mistake. It was due to an error when selecting photos for the print edition, and it did not appear online, and a correction will appear in tomorrow's paper. Some Twitter users claim that this error reflects a larger issue, such as one user who tweeted an error that was missed by how many eyes on the way to final print and before distribution, from journalists to distribution? How many Black people had a hand in producing this piece? My guess, zero. There lies your problem. While others believe it was just an honest mistake. So, Daquon, I want to ask you, do you think that this was an error of the New York Times, or is it a representative of a larger problem?
¿Cómo se dice? Porque no los dos.
Ugh.
Because I think here's the thing. I always get frustrated during these types of conversations where people are just like, it's not about race. It's just a issue. It's just an error that happened. People make mistakes, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, even if that is true, that does not mean that we still can't take that issue and then see what kind of underpinnings are under it, see what our systems are like to make sure that it is not about race indeed. Because if you think about like your physical body, if you had chest pain and you went to the doctor and you said you have this terrible chest pain and they examined you and it was like, oh, well, like you don't have a heart issue, you wouldn't just be like, all right, I'm done and move on. You'd be like, so what is the issue? Because I'm experiencing pain. So if there's an error in a system, even if it's not about race, I still think that race can be part of the conversation to really question, okay, why did this issue happen? And what can we do to prevent this issue in the future? And like that is what I was missing from the New York Times response. Like there was no just like, you know what, Serena, we are sorry. We
We fucked
doing
up.
everything we can to like make sure this doesn't happen again. They're like literally like, oh, an error happened. And it's like, no shit, Sherlock. Like, we know that an error happened, but why did it happen? And what are you doing to make sure it doesn't happen again? And why aren't you saying anything to Serena directly? Like, I'm sure we've talked about this multiple times, but if you're going to have an apology, address directly.
Yeah, I fully agree, Daquan. While there is no way to tell whether, this was truly an honest mistake or not, it doesn't matter in the slightest to me. The
Right.
New York Times is worth over $1.78 billion as of 2019. Y'all have way too fucking much money to be making these kind of mistakes. I mean, had this been a smaller publication, maybe I would have had more leniency. But the New York fucking Times, bitch, I think the fuck not. Like, as the
I think
Twitter
not.
user pointed out, this passed the eyes of how many people before distribution? No, ma'am. Like, as far as this being representative of a larger problem, though, I think it does open up the dialogue of a long-standing issue of microaggressions against Black people in the workplace.
Hmm.
Time and time again, Black people have been confused for each other by their white colleagues and managers several times throughout their tenure with whatever company they're working for, right? Now, I'm going to say this. Of course, people have doppelgangers. We know this. And yes, all races get confused for other people too. We fucking know that. So calm down before you tell us about how Mary Sue and Betty Ann are always told that they favor each other. It's so
Not
annoying.
Mary
It's not
Sue and
about
Betty
race.
Ann.
I'm serious. Bitch, we're not talking about that, okay? We know that shit happens. We're not saying that. But the reality is a Black person being confused for another Black person by a white person who does it so often and so nonchalantly has roots deep in slavery. So it holds an entirely different weight to it. I mean, when African slaves were stolen from their lands and sold into chattel slavery, one of the things that the white captors would do is shave their heads and separate the tribes. This was all done in an effort to erase and strip any form of identity and individualism from the slaves. By making them all appear the same, this was subliminally sending the slaves a dark message, which was that if a slave stepped out of line, the white slave masters would have no problem with killing them because they could easily replace them to have another slave do the same job. So if they want to live, they better do as they're told or face the consequences. Now, while this may not be the intention of all white people when they mistake the identities of their Black coworkers, it doesn't at all lessen the implication or the history behind such a mistake, especially when it happens in repetition with no real effort to correct or an apology for it. I mean, white bosses mistaking the identities of their Black subordinates subconsciously reinforces the idea that their contributions to whatever company or business is not integral enough to differentiate them, which demeans the amount of work and effort they put in. And if they got fired or they left there tomorrow, it wouldn't have any significance or impact on the company whatsoever. They're telling them that they're unimportant and easily replaceable. So it's like you have to understand the deeper impacts of this kind of rhetoric. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not sitting here saying that this is what the New York Times was doing. Again, this is not what all white people are doing, but this is the reason why critical race theory needs to be taught, because so much of this racism isn't just the overt, Klan members or Proud Boys. It's microaggressions that are so ingrained in our society that they happen subconsciously or unintentionally. Teaching our kids about race at a young age opens their eyes to be better people and learn how to create a more inclusive future for the next generation. Maybe if more children are aware of race and microaggressions, mistakes like this wouldn't happen nearly as often as they do. I mean, what do you think, Daquon? Like, what message do you think that this is to Black people when their identities get confused so carelessly by white people?
I think especially in this case, the message is success does not negate Blackness. Because in this situation, you have Serena Williams, who is a tennis superstar, more than a tennis, like she has her own venture firm now, and like she is such a successful person, and yet things like this still happen to her. Or like, I don't know if you heard, but Ryan Coogler tried to withdraw money from his own bank account, and he got the police called on him. And so there are so many situations where like this, where it's like, no matter how high you get as a Black person, you're still a Black person. Your success does not negate that or whitewash you in any type of way. And so it sends a message that really just resonates that Black people are not as notable or noticeable than other type of people. I was reading the actual like publication, and the title of it, the headline was just like, tennis star starts venture firm or something like that. And it's like, Serena Williams is a big enough name that her name could be in the headline.
Bitch,
like, it should not just be exactly. It should not just read tennis star, because Serena Williams is more than just a tennis star.
Yeah, tennis superstar. The fuck, yeah. Like,
exactly.
To me, it's really crazy that, like, we talked about this before on the podcast when we talked about the Sha'Carri Richardson situation, or specifically Simone Biles, where like Black accomplishments are so undermined by white society. Right. And it is such a massive problem that people are still not understanding. Like, I just still can't get past Serena, like Simone Biles creating a whole move, and only for them to say, "Oh yeah, girl, that's too hard for regular people to do. We can't. That's too much. It's just we're not gonna rate it the way it should be rated. We're gonna just take back a whole bunch of that." And so, like you said, just simply saying tennis star, who the fuck?
That could be anybody. I'm sure I'm just saying, I feel like if it was a white tennis star, a name would have been dropped in that headline, but that's just me.
Exactly. So I think that we need to really pay attention to that kind of stuff. I think people really need to stop undermining Black success, stop undermining our contributions to society, stop acting as if we haven't done our work. We haven't done honestly the impossible. It feels like, with how many systems are against us, we have still succeeded and still elevated ourselves. Beyonce's, Oprah's, Tyler Perry. But I gotta give
you
it
ain't
to
had
him.
to go there. You ain't had to go there.
But you know what I'm saying? Like we have persevered against a society that tells us that we do not matter, that our lives don't matter, that our success doesn't matter, and we have still made ourselves household names. We have people know us. Little Nas X is a household name. People know about him. You know, Billy Porter and like the people like that. We're just RuPaul. Like, you know, we are steady showing the world that regardless of what, you know, white society views us as, we will not be silenced, we will not be ignored. And I just think that people need to start recognizing that this is a real issue in our society. This is a real issue, and not just with Black people, but with people of color too. You know, the diminishing of their success is a problem that we need to stop, and we need to grow as a society and realize, baby, white people didn't do everything. And they are the only ones who deserve to be getting their flowers. Okay, the fuck. I mean, and honestly, even with this show, like, you know, Daquon and I do a Black History segment every episode, and every time my mind is blown by some of the shit that I've never ever would have guessed was a thing. The stuff that we have accomplished as Black people, bitch, we magic.
Period. So the hashtag Prince William is a racist went viral on Twitter after the prince's most recent remarks surrounding the war in Ukraine. During a visit to the Ukrainian Cultural Center in London, Prince William said, quote, "Everyone is horrified by what they are seeing. The news every day, it's almost unfathomable to actually witness it, to see it. For our generation, it's very alien to see this in Europe. We're all behind you," end quote. While the Press Association reported that the prince also said they were more used to seeing conflicts in Africa and Asia, no footage of those comments can be found. Bernice A. King, chief executive of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change and youngest daughter of the late civil rights activist, condemned the prince's comment, stating, quote, "Horrific comment. European people ran roughshod over the continent of Africa, pillaging communities, raping women, enslaving human beings, colonizing for profit and power, stealing resources, causing generational devastation, and European nations continue to harm Africa. It is harmful for a global figure to express war as, quote, alien to Europe," end quote. Of course, this isn't the first time the royal family has come under fire for racism, such as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's interview with Oprah, which revealed racist remarks from the royal family. So, Andre, I want to ask you, do you think that Prince William's comments are racist?
Yes. Yes. Not even
Listen,
like
you weren't even, she was not even waiting for me to finish the question.
Absolutely 1,000, 1,000,000,000%. His comments are absolutely racist, and unsurprisingly so. I mean, Prince William is a rich white man, a rich white royal man at that. So everyone is up in arms saying, "Oh, I can't believe he would say this. It's so shocking. How could he possibly?" Girl, we've been telling y'all that shit. Like, what?
This is a royal family that literally colonized the world. Like,
What the fuck? But like, I have no doubt in my mind that Prince William holds racist ideology, just as I believe that every single white person in our society holds some of that same ideology, because racism has touched nearly every corner of human civilization. Just as I believe that every single person holds prejudiced views of varying degrees, because it's impossible to live in human society and not have prejudice. To what degree you have problematic ideology within you is wholly dependent on what knowledge you expose yourself to and how ready you are to unpack those views and ideals. Now, Prince William does not strike me as someone who'd want to unpack those ideals. He strikes me as someone who'd rather sweep things under the rug, wait for people to calm down and move on. I suspect that he may make some half-assed apology and be photographed with a few black people with that, hey, see, I'm not racist smile on his face. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
I am waiting for that picture.
You know it's coming, bitch. You know it's coming. And I do not think, even if he ever actually did have an apology, if he ever does one, I don't think his apology will hold any accountability. It's going to be filled with so many excuses. You know, I misspoke X, Y, and Z, and I have always been an advocate for X, Y, and Z. Or, like I said, more likely than not, it'll be a written statement released by his team, and his signature will be at the bottom, all fancy like. But I do
with a quill.
With the quill, yeah, with the with the royal insignia. But I do think that we absolutely need to discuss the fact that too many white people still subconsciously hold the belief, to whatever degree, that whiteness equals civilized and blackness or people of color equals savagery, like Prince William. White people still have a tendency to view themselves as a higher quality people or on a different level, even when they're supposedly trying to be inclusive. Have you noticed that too? Like, a prime example of this is when a reporter asked Senator Mitch McConnell if he had a message for voters of color who are concerned that they will not have access to voting in the 2022 midterm elections. And he replied, well, the concern is misplaced because if you look at the statistics, African American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans.
Wait.
But you heard what I said. He said,
not him saying black people aren't Americans.
And that's exactly what he said. And I want to, Daquon, this really brings up an interesting question. Like, do you think that the Western coverage of the Russian-Ukraine, conflict differs from the coverage and, conflicts in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East? Because, I mean, do you think that has anything to do with why Prince William's comments were so racist?
Yeah, I think that there's a connection. There is a through line between all of this. It is snaking through. Because I think that, it's quite wild to think that somebody is like, oh yeah, war is foreign to Europe. Like, that's not something Europeans do. And it's like, aren't the Europeans the people that like invented war? Like, let's be honest. But I also think that, it's one of those things that we have been so desensitized to, different conflicts in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, that it's just like people are seeing this now with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and they're like, whoa, like this is people who, kind of look like us. Like, that's a problem because they don't have the same empathy for people who have darker skin. They don't have the same people. They don't have the same empathy for people who practice a different religion. And so I think that is that through line between this conflict and the coverage of it and Prince William's comments of just like, people are so used to this like white Christian ideology being so pure and unable to just like have its problems or cause conflict. And it's like, there was Christian conflict. Like, there was wars fought over Christianity. Several. So I do think that this is such a horrific comment to hear. I know that, the part that specifically mentions Africa and Asia, there's not that evidence that it happens. But even without that, even if you just stopped at it's very alien to see this in Europe, that is problematic. That is something that, you basically say that Europeans could never have this happen to them because for whatever reason, and when we think about those reasons, it's underlying that Europeans are more civilized. We don't go to war and all of these different facets.
Yeah, I think it really is like the whitewashing of so much of history. Like, white people have not been some of the most violent in the wars and in, society. And it just really reinforces the idea, because if you look at a lot of our media that we intake, because media is a form of, indoctrination. So propaganda, exactly. So when we see media, the way that they portray Black people and the way that they portray people of color and the way they portray white people is vastly different, especially among white media. And that's why we also say like just how far the reach is of racism, because even if you are not being taught in American school systems, if you're taking in American television, there's so much in it that reinforces this idea that white is right and black and POC is wrong, or that we are always either seen as gang members, drug something, some kind of all these different layers of stereotypes. And we've talked about this before in another episode, but there's so many of these stereotypes that indoctrinate people into racism and that tell them this is what it is. And Prince William is absolutely a product of that, because in his mind, in his eyes, from the white history that he's being taught, from the fact that he probably doesn't have many black friends or POC friends
If
that help,
any.
if any at all. I mean, he might got one he might hire for this photograph that he gonna take next week.
Let's not even say hire. That person ain't getting paid. That person not seeing a single, what's the money in your pounds? They're not seeing a single pound.
Bitch, shut your ass up. But you're right. They might be volunteering. They might be the service for the country. They might be like, yeah, you'll do the service to Prince William. But no, I think I think that Prince William is a product of that. Like the facts are like, it doesn't excuse the fact, because I mean, you're a grown ass man. You can Google this shit. But also, I really want to go back to that whole fact of like, you can't find the footage of him saying what he did, like the stuff that he did say. And like, we know that there's a record that somebody heard him say it. Like, we know that it's been said, but the fact that the internet has been scrubbed of it, I think is also indicative of how we protect white people. How we, but specifically white cis men. And like, when you said, oh, it was removed or you can't find footage of it anywhere, that just goes to show me that this government, that their government, and especially this royal family, they don't want to take accountability for the shit they're doing.
Not at all.
They don't want to, especially Prince William. He's like, bitch, I ain't saying nothing wrong. Who said that? Who said that? Who said that? But and I really want to bring this back a little bit, we recently talked about the Whoopi Goldberg situation too, and I kind of want to do a little through line here too. Like, it's mighty funny how black people and indigenous people or people of color are able to take responsibility more often for what they've done and be met with such vitriol and hate and disrespect. But when white people do it, they can make some half-assed, unaccountable apology, and everybody's flocking to forgive them. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that shit pisses me off to no end. Like, and I go back to what Amanda Seales says about us being the standard, us being the one that we want to throw the book at, that people want to just get us to check this white, this nigga, basically, and it's just like, it frustrates me to no end that the way that our society, even in British society too, and that society too, like, in all of it, how deeply we protect and defend white men and women, and how safe they are in our society from any kind of responsibility or accountability. And
right.
We are not given, not that anyone should be given leniency like that, but I think that the facts are, look at the reactions of even the Jussie Smollett situation that we talked about before as well. Like, just bringing it all together full circle, like, just look at how we are structurally, systematically treated in our society versus how white society treats themselves, and how much leeway people like Prince William, people like Joe Rogan, people like Donald Trump, who are able to, and again, just to say this too, like, the fact that Donald Trump was able to take office after all of the things that came out about him way before he got elected and and didn't get impeached, all the shit that he's done. If the Barack Obama did 1%, not even a half of a
fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent.
Like,
we're here.
It'll be fucking at the stake. It will be all kind of shit, like all kind of. I mean, we've seen it online, the way people have reacted to Barack Obama and stuff like that. So just bringing it back to home here, like, I think that the fact that Prince William is able to do this, and I know for a fact, I have no doubt in my mind, Daquon, that he's not going to have to make any accountability for this. It's going to be swept under the rug, just like everything else is that white men and white women do. And I think that as far as, we all know that what he said was problematic. We all know that what he said was wrong, but we also know that no one's going to hold them accountable for it. They'll hold them accountable for it for about a couple more, maybe a day or two, maybe a day.
A
But
second.
a second, yeah, maybe a second.
A
And after that,
millisecond.
he'll be just fine.
You know, that's privilege for you. Privilege gives you the privilege to make mistakes. Privilege gives you the privilege to misspeak. And then you can chalk it up. Oh, it was just a mistake. I just misspoke. That's all it is. It's just a mistake.
Yeah, why
As
are
we've
y'all
seen
mad?
before. It's just an honest mistake. Like, why are you taking this so seriously? It has nothing to do with race. Now, the table is always hot with current events and social issues, but sometimes the heat can get a little intense. Let's turn the temp down, take a breather, and get into this week's topic cool down. Andre, what do you have for us?
All right, Daquon, I want to ask you, how do you feel about Hollywood mediums or those who claim to speak to the dead for a fee?
I'm going to just say this. If something is dead, it is dead. I'm not trying to speak to it. Like, I feel like if it died for a reason. We're not trying to bring them back and have conversations with them. But like that is completely separate from, you know, spiritual practices and everything like that. Like that is completely different. If your spiritual beliefs have that part in you, like I 100% respect that. But this is more for the people who specifically charge for a fee because it's like it just rubs me the wrong way because you are profiting off of other people's death, other people's dead loved ones. Like you are profiting off of that pain. People are coming to you because they have that pain. And you say some things. Now, I'm not going to say whether I believe that mediums actually speak to the dead or not, because that's a whole nother can of worms. But I think that is one of those things that even in that situation, I think that it feels icky to me that you're basing your entire business off of that pain, if that makes any sense.
It does. I feel the same way about Hollywood mediums as I do about Christian televangelists.
Oh,
And I think that they are both incredibly problematic for much of the same reasons. Once something is mainstream, it's really hard to maintain integrity and authenticity of the work that you do because mainstream is formulated to be consumed by the masses. Now, I'm not saying that there probably aren't a handful of people who may believe they have the gift to commune with the dead because there's no way to know or prove that sort of thing.
right.
However, if those people do exist, they have been overshadowed by those who are just looking to get a paycheck. The commercialization of religion and faith has damaged the integrity of all mediums and spiritual healers. Too many of them have been caught researching their clients beforehand, having inner earpieces, being encouraged by their production teams to make it bigger or more intense, all in an effort to boost ratings. And what hurts the most about Hollywood mediums for me is that there are people who are out there who truly want to connect to someone they've lost. And these people who claim to be psychic mediums weaponize the grief of their clients against them. They sometimes purposefully lead the session astray so that the person will have to pay more for another session, and many of them use cold reading techniques to make their client believe they are actually communing with the deceased when in reality the psychic, that's it with air quotes, is just giving them very general information that they narrow down based on the reactions of the client. I mean, they
Right.
create the illusion.
I'm speaking to somebody
Yeah.
that once wore a black shirt.
Wait a minute. Was your mother, was she, did she laugh? Was she able to laugh?
Right. What I'm getting this feeling of a masculine figure. Have you ever known a masculine person?
Like they really do create this illusion of a supernatural phenomenon through various forms of manipulation tactics. And like I said, that's just as problematic as a Christian televangelist trying to sell you salvation for 5 easy payments of $89.95. Like, let me just say this real quick. I want to clarify that I myself am a spiritualist. But just because I believe in intuition, tarot reading, and magic, doesn't mean that I wouldn't challenge spiritualism just as much as I challenge Christianity. Because, like all faiths that exist, it cannot be proven as fact. I believe that there is nothing wrong with having faith. Faith is a beautiful thing, a wonderful thing. But when you try to sell it to me as fact, that's where I draw the line, because it's not fact. It's a belief, your belief, more specifically. I'm just as quick to check a bitch who claims to know for a fact that she can see the future and cast spells as I would a bitch who tells me that God and Christianity is the only way to a peaceful afterlife. But
Okay, Raven Simone.
but for argument's sake, Daquon, let's say for a fact that people could see the dead, right? Let's say that was a fact that we knew, right? When big money gets involved, it may be really, really, really difficult for people to maintain that integrity. Many people in the world have a price, and those who claim to be psychics are not immune to being persuaded by the mighty dollar. That's not to say that some don't come in with the original intention of helping people. And let's say that they turn down certain deals because it conflicted with their moral compass. Maybe a TV show producer offered them $10,000 to make up something for an audience, right? And even if they didn't, connect to something or whatever, they said no. So they were like, no, I'm not gonna do that, right? Then the producer offers them 20,000, 50,000, 100,000.
100.
And if those numbers get high enough, even if they receive no kind of vision or connection, they'll put on a very mighty believable performance. I mean, but I want to ask you also, Daquon, have you noticed that if you watch these mediums go off and talk about all the stuff or whatever, it's always good news? Have you noticed that?
Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm getting this voice. Somebody with the name Bees starts with the name B. They're telling me that they're happy.
Yeah.
They're telling me that they feel good.
They
Because I
forgive
think that
you.
I think that's part of, the whole package. Because if you gave bad news, if you said, "Oh, yeah, no, they're burning, they're screaming, they're in trouble," that person who came to you is like, I'm never going to come to you again because that's
Yeah.
not what I wanted to hear. And I think that to a certain extent, if you go to a medium, there is something that you want to hear. You want to hear that, somebody who passed on forgives you for something that you did. You want to hear that somebody who passed on feels at peace and they're at rest and they're happy and they're, reconnected with their other loved ones that may have passed before them. That's what you want to hear. And so I think that anytime something is on TV, let's be real, I don't think it's real. Like,
Right.
because TV studios, they have to deal with the numbers. They got to make profits. And so if you're not giving good TV, they're
Yeah.
just going to scrap the project and move on to whatever else is going to make them some quick bucks.
Exactly. And I think that it's so crazy because I'm still waiting for that disgruntled, mean, nasty ghost. You know what I'm saying? That family member Delia who found out that after she died, that her husband had been sleeping with her sister for the past 3 years or something like that or some shit like that. Like, I'm waiting for that kind of shit. But we don't see that kind of shit in the media and on medium shows and stuff like that. And I think honestly, that would be more believable because I can't with everybody saying, oh, she wants to say that she loves you.
Also,
And then
I don't know if you've noticed, I feel
what?
like a lot of mediums that are on TV are also white. And I feel that plays a role into it as well.
Daquon. Daquon. You better bring that shit back. We can't get into that, Daquon. This is a topic cool down. This is a topic cool down.
We got to cool down.
But bitch, you said that. I'm gonna move on because you said that. That's it right there. Ooh. Now, So many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. So, Daquon, I think it's time for a change. Let's
Amen.
let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. In an article written on the National Visionary Leadership Project, we learn about Leah Chase, also known as the Queen of Creole Cuisine. She was the executive chef of Dookie Chase's restaurant, one of the best known and most culturally significant restaurants in New Orleans. In a town deeply divided by segregation, Dookie Chase's restaurant was one of the only public places in New Orleans where mixed race groups could meet to discuss strategy for the local civil rights movement. Although such gatherings were illegal through most of the 1960s, Dookie Chase's was so popular it would have caused a public uproar if law enforcement had interrupted the meetings. Black voter registration campaign organizations, the NAACP, backdoor political meetings, the Nation of Islam, and countless others often found a home at Dookie Chase's. Chase has fed the likes of Jesse Jackson, Duke Ellington, Thurgood Marshall, James Baldwin, Ray Charles, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and countless others. Black women.
I just love to hear it. Love to hear it. Black women.
Black women. Black women, black women, black women.
Black women. On the topic of Black women, Marian Anderson is known as one of the most renowned singers of the 20th century. The daughter of a small business owner and teacher, Anderson began performing as early as the age of 10. Though she tried to enroll in the Philadelphia Music Academy, she was rejected due to her race. Despite that, her career absolutely flourished as she won first prize in a New York Philharmonic competition, toured Europe, performed nearly 70 recitals a year in the 1930s, sang for not one but two presidential inaugurations, was the first African American to perform at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, sang during the March on Washington, had over 1,500 songs in her repertoire, sang in 9 languages, and performed on 4 continents. Anderson, let's be real, that is Black excellence right there. Anderson was not only awarded for her musical talents, but also her work for civil rights and peace. She earned the NAACP Springer Medal in 1939, the United Nations Peace Prize in 1977, a Grammy Award for Lifetime Achievement in 1991, and was not only the first African American woman to receive a Presidential Medal of Freedom, but one of the original 31 to be the first recipients, period.
Bitch! Bitch!
When I say Black women, they're not just constantly rising the bar, they are setting the bar.
They are the standard. The fuck? Like, at this
They are
point,
the bar.
Like, this, oh my God, like, 8. Like, she, girl, left no crumbs. Bitch, that plate is clean. That plate is, bitch, she ate the plate. She ate the motherfucking plate. That's fucking sickening. Now, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and please keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and if you are listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you're using. You can also follow our podcast on Instagram and TikTok at the Melanin Margin for updates of new content.
And if you like to follow each of us, our handles are at Daquon MUE
and at Andre Talks a Lot, baby.
Now, we will see you all next week on the Melanin Margin, where our goal is always to bring the marginalized to the spotlight in any way we can. Goodbye now.